What's going on, y'all? Fort Worth Fabian, man. We back with a video. We're doing a reaction to Thomas Sowell reacts to the end of the Department of Education, man. Let's get right into the video. So those who aren't familiar, man, the U.S. Department of Education, the cabinet level department of the U.S. government, began operating in 1980. Having been created after the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was split into the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services by the Department of Education Organization Act, which Jimmy Carter signed into law on October 17th, 1979, man. So obviously a lot of deep history, man. Let's go. Like, comment, subscribe.
If you think the confusing the Vietnam War with the Korean War is thinking and meditating, well, then of course that's very nice. The tragedy is that these kids have no conception of thinking.
When questioned about the closure, Elon Musk simply replied, "No such department exists in the federal government." Trump blasted the incompetence of the department, citing America's low education ranking on the world stage.
Yes, back in 1966, there were about twice as many C's as A's given out in the public schools in the United States. By the late 70s, there were twice as many A's as C's. So you have this long period during which all sorts of test scores are going down. At this very same time, grades are going up.
Is that going on at both the elementary, secondary
Yes.
level, and college level?
At the college level. During the entire decade of the 1980s, the percentage of A's at Yale University never fell below 40%.
So you're saying there's a great inflation going on, and there are declining test scores.
Yes. And this is part of the deception, because if people knew exactly what was happening, I don't think the test scores could have kept going down as long as they did. But everyone was told, they saw the wonderful grades their kids were bringing home. They were told glowing things. When I was teaching back in the 1960s, I kept hearing that this was the brightest and best generation that we'd had, and I kept saying, they don't seem to be enrolling in my courses. And it was only well into the 70s before the word came out that the data showed just the opposite of what the educators were saying.
And now it would seem that a good many educators are in agreement with you when they talk about the serious straits that our American schools are in.
They agree in the sense only that this kind of talk gets them more money. And in fact, that's used as the biggest reason why we need more money. But in point of fact, the money spent on education was rising by leaps and bounds throughout the entire period during which the test scores were going down. Somewhere in the early...
I wonder what was causing that drastic polarization. You got scores going up simultaneously, kids essentially flunking. You know what I mean? So it's like a clear separation of like the IQs and really the intellects standing out or being plateaued, or not really plateaued, but pedestalized, you know, separating themselves. But
early 80s, there was a leveling off and a few little rises, but we have never come close to where we were in 1963.
Talk about the social phenomenon you call affective education.
Saying people got stupider over time, essentially. 70s, 60 to 70s, he said 63.
Rises, but we have never come close to where we were in 1963.
Talk about
I would say leading into the 70s may not be completely attributed to the hippie era. A lot of experimentation, drugs. I don't know when that really broke, mid 60s to late 60s, I don't know, and then came a thing in the 70s. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's just me just guesstimating, but that could be a contributing factor if you really think about it. I'm not going to say the drug epidemic, but the introduction to drugs and more so free thinking and people going against the grain. You saw scores and actual grades decline.
social phenomenon you call affective education and how it plays into this whole question of just how good schools are.
A great deal of time and energy are spent on things which are non-academic subjects, which are essentially psychological kinds of subjects, exercises. And this is known as affective education, as if you can somehow educate people's feelings rather than to educate their intellect. And the problem is that most public school teachers have no such qualifications, if anyone has such qualifications. But certainly they are not psychiatrists or psychologists. They have no idea of the emotional turmoil they may be stirring up in the students. And there's some evidence that that's happening in terms of medical.
I completely renounce that. If you're talking about catering or teaching feelings versus the actual material or actually educating one's students, where do they do that? But I can see how that's what maybe certain, I'm not going to attribute all schools or educational programs to this, but maybe that's what they've become, to where it's more so like a babysitting session. Kids aren't really learning nothing in the class. You're just there to watch them and make sure you keep them out of trouble, essentially.
Reactions of vomiting, signs of nerves in various ways. But more than that, what they tend to do is to try to alienate the child from the parent. And I think that's the most dangerous thing they do.
How did they do that?
Well, if you read the literature, it's just astonishing how parents are depicted in the literature as people who are hung up, who have old-fashioned ideas. One of the areas in which they do is sex education, but it's not sex education as such, because there are a whole series of kinds of education of the emotions, as they would put it, which do the same thing. And the idea is that the child is supposed to make his own decisions, and he's supposed to pick his own values on which to make those decisions. So the whole history of the human race is sort of thrown out the window, and Johnny is supposed to start and draw upon his entire 8 or 9 years of experience in the world to decide what his values ought to be.
It was interesting in the...
He ain't lying about that. There's the whole concept of... funny enough, I was using a reference the other day because we were talking about the artistic mind and how creatives tend to want to go one route. Like he just mentioned, the natural literature aren't like the most popular things that kids want to participate in. It's typically extracurricular activities or something artsy. And I was saying the artist never gets the credit from, like, the family won't believe in the dream until the dream happens. So it's like your parents, family members, want the best for you, so they're going to recommend the politically correct things to do. Get a 4-year degree, become a doctor, you should be a scientist, be an accountant. And it's kind of in relation to his point, to where it's like they paint the picture of the parent in a negative light, and you should follow your dreams and go, which you should in reality. You should go do what you want to do. And it's funny that he mentioned the 8 or 9 year old kid being able to pick upon his holistic knowledge and wisdom of the world. I'm like, come on, dude. What are we talking about?
Book you
know
used
what I mean?
an example of an
But, good
exchange that you had with a student, and I guess your question to the student was something like, well, what did you learn? And the response was something like, I learned that my thoughts and my feelings are valued.
Yes.
Whereas there was no effort to speak to a fact or something learned, but rather the emphasis placed on feeling
I know
and
the episode.
interpretation.
That was actually Ben Stein, a reporter in Los Angeles, and he asked this graduating senior who was considered the smartest kid in the class, what do you know about the Vietnam War? And he said the Vietnam War was when North and South Korea were fighting, and they drew a line along the 38th parallel and so on. And Ben Stein said, would it bother you to know that that's completely wrong? He said, no. And he said, then what you just said, that it was that his feelings were valued, what his thoughts were valued, and that was it.
But now, isn't that of some worth if you do have a child who, for example, has done nothing but learn by rote? Aren't you attempting to bring out the fullness of that young person and get that person to reflect and think and meditate?
If you think the confusing the Vietnam War with the Korean War is thinking and meditating, well, then of course that's very nice. The tragedy is that these kids have no conception of thinking. And if we're talking about adding something as an extra along the fringes, fine. But when you see how far behind we are behind almost every large industrial nation, or even behind Korea, for heaven's sake, you wonder what makes them think that we have the luxury of spending our time on these kinds of little experiments in the classroom. Just recently, I received a letter from a high school student who wanted my opinion on a wide variety of subjects. And this was a classroom assignment. This questionnaire was to be sent out to people. And I wrote him back that the opinions of old men like me don't matter. What matters is whether young people like you learn to think, get some knowledge, because you're going to be making these decisions long after I'm gone. And to think that people are wasting your time, having you send out these questionnaires to people you don't know, is a sign of just why we're so far behind.
Bars. Dude said so much, man. But to imagine this is 93, over 30 years ago, when this was the state of where people perceived the youth's minds where people were coming to understand that some of our kids are dumb. We're not teaching them nothing. And if your takeaway from being in a educational environment is more so about how you feel and how your opinion is validated and respected because everyone should be heard, if that's not the most opposite thing I've heard in my life, like, you completely lost the premise. Like, what are you doing there? If I signed up for a course and I didn't even learn anything about that course, what I learned was my opinion and feelings matter. What are we doing, bro? And I can piggyback off the sense that we live in a very soft, emotional, triggered kind of society today, to where you got to walk on eggshells. Oh my God, what did you say? Everybody gets offended. It's just ridiculous. And that, look at this, it could be attributed to the educational system.
Whether blatant or subtle, brainwashing has become a major time-consuming activity in American education at all levels. Some zealots have not hesitated to use the traditional brainwashing technique of emotional trauma in the classroom to soften up children for their message. Gruesome and graphic movies on nuclear war, for example, have reduced some school children to tears, after which the teacher makes a pitch for whatever movement claims to reduce such dangers. I remember as a kid growing up and learning that across the Atlantic there are schools who have
That's
all
nasty
these
work.
weekly field trips and fun games and movies. And I'm here busting my butt on tough maths and science, and I'm thinking, why couldn't we have such nice things here? So as far as it depends on Johnny's opinion, Johnny doesn't want to do any of the tough maths or science stuff. He wants all the fun. But if we're asking Live's opinion, Live will tell Johnny he better focus and bust his butt to get that math and science right. Otherwise, he's going to be slaving through life for the rest of his life, while his teacher goes on to receive several self-congratulatory awards for ruining his life. You let me know what you think about this in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit that bell if you're new to the channel. Thank you for watching, and on to the next one.
That's hilarious, bro. Dude is literally saying that, hey, the teachers aren't teaching y'all nothing, man. They're really ruining y'all's lives. That is crazy. That is wild. Think about that, y'all. Peel back the layers. Really, if I were to keep it honest, 1,000 a bean, and look back at what I took away from middle school, high school, nothing at all. In one regard, I think the education system has failed us to where they don't teach real world lessons. Budgeting, financing, credit. These things should be taught. Whatever you can learn in college, we need to be learning that in high school. Like, that's how advanced high schools and middle schools need to be nowadays. I don't need to pay $100K to go to your 10-year, $100K, your university, and then end up having to wait till I'm on the verge of 20 years old, 19, 20, before I start learning about the real world. And really, it's not even holistic because it's pertaining to a major. So at that point, it's really focused. But yeah, pertaining to the adolescent years, middle school, high school, we should be learning about how to handle finances, how to build credit, and pretty much save for the future, being able to understand what to prepare for when it comes to college. Like, I don't think high school really has a lot of scenarios that prepare you for that. Of course, I may be out of the loop, but generally speaking, back in my day, no. So, something to think about. And it's one thing just to look at IQ and test scores, but then to look how society operates now, there's a lot of attributing factors to where we are today. Don't get it twisted. It's not the Department of Education, but it's a multitude of things. Honestly, I didn't realize from this perspective how much of a role it has played, because I never really looked at it from this perspective. So comment down below. Let me know y'all's thoughts, man. Peace, love, prosperity. Subscribe to the channel. God bless. We'll see y'all next time. We out.